Hello, friends. For these moments, I'd like to reflect with you on Holy Thursday and the liturgy of the Mass of the Lord's Supper. At that liturgy, we hear this gospel read from John. Before the feast of Passover, Jesus realized that the hour had come for him to pass from this world to the Father. He had loved his own in this world and would show his love for them to the end. The devil had already induced Judas, son of Simon Iscariot, to hand him over, and so during the supper, Jesus, fully aware that he had come from God and was going to God the Father, who had handed everything over to him, rose from the meal and took off his cloak. He picked up the towel and tied it around himself. Then he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet and dry them with the towel he had around him. Thus he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus answered, "You may not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." Peter replied, "You shall never wash my feet." "If I do not wash you," Jesus answered, "you will have no share in my heritage." "Lord," Simon Peter said to him, "then not only my feet, but my hands and head as well." Jesus told him, "The man who has bathed has no need to wash except for his feet. He is entirely cleansed, just as you are, though not all." The reason he said not all are washed clean was that he knew his betrayer. After he had washed their feet, he put his cloak back on and reclined at table once more. He said to them, "Do you understand what I just did for you? You address me as teacher and Lord, and fittingly enough, for that is what I am. But if I washed your feet, I who am teacher and Lord, then you must wash each other's feet. What I just did was to give you an example. As I have done, so you must do." The liturgy of the Mass of the Lord's Supper on Holy Thursday evening is a liturgy that introduces us to the movement of the Holy Week Triduum. It begins on a high point. The Gloria is sung, and the opening prayer is said. And then we hear these scriptures culminating in the gospel that I just read. Usually following the gospel and its homily, the mandatum is done. The acting out of what the Lord first did for us in washing the disciples' feet. This year, because of the restrictions of the liturgy with the coronavirus, you won't see the mandatum acted out. Following that, the Mass proceeds as usual until after communion, when usually the reserved Eucharist is placed on the altar, and then a procession begins to take it to another place of reservation, where the faithful will remain to pray through the night. This year, again, because of the special circumstances, there will be no procession to another place of reservation. The Eucharist will simply be placed back in the tabernacle at the end of the Mass of the Lord's Supper. What is the movement of this liturgy? We see in this whole action of the Church to begin to draw us into the mystery of Jesus' saving death and resurrection, an acclamation of who God is, also a way of showing us how God is, and then the opportunity to reflect on what that means in facing our real lives. Two primary themes can be seen to be carried out in the liturgy of the Lord's Supper. The first of those themes is service. You know, in the world that we live in today, too often we think of service from the outside. We think about service is what do I do to serve others? What do I give them? Or what do I provide for them so that their lives will be better? We feed, we clothe, we shelter. We give out of our bounty so that others may have means for their lives. And so often we are prone to judge the value of what we do by its effects. Are there better physical and psychological conditions for people to live in? Now, I don't want to disparage that. Those are good things. Those are necessary things. Those are things that we rely upon to sometimes get through difficult times in our lives, like now. But that only scratches the surface. What Jesus did in washing the disciples' feet shows us how God works. That is how God is with us. The power of God is the power of service. It's not the power of dominance, the power of imposing our wills. God doesn't take over a human situation by forcing himself on it from the outside. But God's power prevails by entering into the human condition from the bottom up, from the cracks where some genuine human need arises. It's there that the mystery of God is shown, by eventually revealing that there's much more at stake here than either a clash of wills or who wins or who loses. At stake is what makes life tick. What makes life worthwhile? What lasts and prevails, no matter the particulars of a situation. Service shows us what God looks like and how God works in our world and what genuine love demands. Putting ourselves at the disposal of others. Without service of that sort, we have no clue to who the God who Jesus called Father is, and how God's life lives in our midst. That's why when Peter objected and said, "Lord, you'll never wash my feet," Jesus responds, "If I don't wash you, you have no part of me." The only way that I can enter into your life and you can enter into mine is through understanding that our service to each other is an engagement of the holy. Another major part of this liturgy of the Mass of the Lord's Supper is silence. You know, the whole liturgy of Holy Thursday is a decrescendo. It's a movement from the gloria, the exaltation of God, through the sobering questions of the Mandatum, to the reassuring intimacy of the Eucharistic communion, to finally the sober silence of the reposition of the Eucharistic elements. Silence is a key to the Holy Week Triduum, and one that is so desperately needed, yet so sorely lacking in the world that we're in today. You know, we're so used to noise around us that we don't even notice it. Music surrounds us. Talk is everywhere, on the radio, the TV, the internet. We so often need background noise just to keep out the noise of the rest of the world. The gift of a large part of the Triduum liturgy is silence, and it begins with the closing of the Holy Thursday ritual. The procession that usually happens without accompaniment, with a simple chant of the Tantum Ergo, and then it ends simply with prayer in silence. And that prayer of silence is to continue as we keep vigil through the night. Now, this year, we won't be able to go to our churches for that kind of watchfulness with the Lord. But we can keep that silence in our own homes, where God dwells with us. What does silence offer us? I'm not talking about the quiet of sleep that Jesus' disciples fell into in the garden, remember. Silence is the vigilance, the watchfulness of prayer, of placing ourselves before God and listening. What happens when we do that? We see and we hear things in silence that we often totally miss in the cacophony of our daily lives. The mystery that undergirds everything gets a chance to reveal itself in silence. In silence, we can see God's hand in the midst of all the other hands that are shaping our lives. In silence, we can hear a word that's often blocked out by all the other words that fill our days. All the orders and exclamations and assignments and persuasions and explanations that we get are often empty of the Word of God that we need. It's that word that says, I know you. I love you. I am with you. Be not afraid. Be well. We need to hear that word these days. A word that tells us that no matter how difficult the circumstances might get, you are before God, and God is for you. That is what Jesus confronted in the Garden of Gethsemane, isn't it? And his listening there in prayer allowed him to proceed with his mission. Silence also slows us down. Did you ever notice that it's really hard to be quiet when you're very busy? When we're busy, we're usually shouting orders, grabbing things, rushing out the door, and starting the car engine. To do all of that quietly, you have to slow down. And that's the point. If we linger in silence long enough, we get beyond the uncomfortable sense of having nothing to do to the comfortable place of being who we are with who God is. When you get to that point, then you are at peace. And it's at that point that we can say, as Jesus said in Gethsemane, "Thy will be done." In the silence of his prayer, he came to see that there was no other way, there was no alternative for his life if it was to be authentic and true. Because of who he was as the Messiah and who God was as his Father, and what the world was like as a weak and sin-laden place. In the silence, he came to see it all fitting together. And he came to understand that this was God's will for him. In that, he found peace. And in that peace, he found the strength and the courage to go on. Oh, don't we yearn for that these days? And here we are, with the church's liturgy offering us the opportunity to reflect upon how well we serve each other in the genuine sense of giving our lives over in a communion of relationship. We're given the opportunity to listen in silence, to slow down through the silence and discover what the Lord discovered in his quiet prayer. God was with him, and that God would never, never abandon him. Holy Thursday is a time for us to grow more deeply into the mystery of God who walks with us.